Hey everyone, welcome to another top 10 list. This week's top 10 list is finally the conclusion of my top 10/20 notes with stories. When I first went through my collection, I figured it would be easy to grab 10 notes with stories, and I was correct. It was very easy to find 10 notes with good stories. In fact, I found 20 notes with good stories. So I started to do my top 20 notes with really cool stories, except each note has a cool story which takes time to tell. So I've only been able to get through 5 notes each video, but we finally made it to the top 5 of the top 20. So hopefully this is full of information you may or may not have already known, but at least it should be a little interesting. All right, so let's check out the top 5 notes. Number 5, and before I do this, I will say that I still have not received back my notes from grading, so I do have to use some replicas, but that doesn't change the story on the notes. All right, number 5 on my list. Bringing out my 1923 $5 silver certificate. My $5 silver certificate from 1923. I didn't ever think much of this particular note in the past because I didn't know the stories associated with this note. But my good friend JRW3 was kind enough to inform me of some of the stuff on this note, which made it, to me, really interesting. So I was very excited to get the note when I heard all the stories. So what is it? What's the deal with this? Well, first and foremost, this is a 1923 large size $5 silver certificate. It is the only large size $5 silver certificate that has 1900 as the date. Prior to this was the 1899 note, and prior to that 1896. So if you're looking for a 20th century large size $5 note, this is it. This is the only one you can possibly find. They didn't print that many of these notes, and they are very tough to come by. It turns out that there's only somewhere an estimated 1,500 to 4,000 of these notes still out there. So they are very tough to get a hold of, which makes them a little more on the pricey side. Now, one of the other things that was fascinating about this note, let me just flip over in the back here just so you can see that side as well. One of the other more fascinating things about this is called the porthole, because it looks like Lincoln is looking out of a porthole of a ship. The thing is that it wasn't always thought to be that, okay? Lincoln was assassinated, we all know that, and if you think of a James Bond movie, and this is a really weird way to think of it, but how do James Bond movies start? James Bond movies always start with this circle, and you'll see James Bond walk through the circle, and then you hear the bang, and the blood comes down. People would assume that the circle portion was the equivalent of looking down a barrel at Lincoln, looking down the barrel of a gun. And like I said, the equivalent is the James Bond openings. And since Lincoln was assassinated, Lincoln was assassinated 50 to 60 years, so there were people that were alive at the time of Lincoln's assassination now holding these bills. That is why these bills weren't held in high favor at the time. They thought it was done in poor taste. So yeah, even though we think of it as a porthole note, it's kind of interesting to think of it as like the first iteration of James Bond movies, where you look down the gun sight to see Lincoln in that circle like that. So kind of a dark and morbid thought. I never really put that together on these notes before, but yeah, that's the story behind this one. That is number 5 on the list. Number 4. This was the precursor to that note. This was the 1899 $5 silver certificate. And this note also has a little bit of an issue to it. This is called the Chief note. The Chief is known as Chief Running Antelope. The Chief also has, I've got his real name listed here as well. Let's just pop through here so I can be correct on it. And I know I'm going to butcher it when I try to say it. Let's see, here we go. There's the Chief note. Bust of Tadoka Inyaka, also known as Running Antelope, member of the Unkpapa tribe, which people always call One Papa, but it's Unkpapa. Tribe of Sioux Indians. George F.C. Simile engraved the portrait. This is the only issue of U.S. paper money for which a Native American was selected as the central feature. Okay, so that is a real person. That is a real person on this note. It is not just random Indian. This is Chief Running Antelope. I can't try to pronounce the name again. So real person on the note. However, when the engraving was done, when the seating was done for this, they wanted to have the tribal feathers on the chief just to complete the picture. The thing is that these were not the tribal headdress of Chief Unkpapa's tribe. This was a rival headdress. But it's all they had sitting around, so they said, put this on, and he did not want to put that on. In fact, he may not have put it on at all. The headdress may have been done after the fact, but there was huge controversy about him actually wearing this headdress because those in the know would know that he would have never worn that particular headdress. So, yeah, controversy on the 5 from 1923. Controversy on the 1899 precursor as well. That's number 4 on the list. Number 3 on the list. There's going to be a trend because prior to the 1899 $5 silver certificate, we had the 1896 $5 silver certificate. They just couldn't get these right, could they? 1896 $5 silver certificate. This is part of the educational series. Now, in 1896, they came up with this wonderful idea of making currency to help educate the public. Most people weren't in cities. Most people were out in rural areas and never had the ability to go to museums. And some people, even schooling was not available. So the government figured, let's make the $1 note about history teaching youth. Let's make the $2 note about science and history. And let's make the $5 note about electricity. And you can see there is a bolt of lightning coming here, hitting the torch and illuminating all of that. So that was the story behind the educational series. The problem was that, well, this person and this person, they didn't put a top on. And the people of the time, the people of 1896 said, we will not have pornography in our pockets. And they demanded that these notes get repealed. So these all got pulled and they had to redo the series in 1899. So 1896 $5 note, just take a quick look at the back of that one there. That's the back of that one. 1896 had a problem. They replaced it with the 1899, which had a problem, which they eventually replaced in 1923, which had a problem. So, yeah, there's quite the trend. Number 5, number 4, and number 3 on my list. Number 2. Number 2, we are going with, this is a Delaware colonial note. You can see it's from 1759. It's 20 shillings. If you read on this note, you can see 20 shillings right here. You can see in the 3rd year of our sovereign lord, King George, dated 1759 right there, 20 shillings. So yeah, here's American currency. I'm going to call it American currency because it was from the colonies, Delaware colonial note, not United States because we weren't the United States back then. But this particular note, like I said, is American currency. What makes this note so special, aside from being as old as it is? Well, one of the things you'll notice is on the back, you can see it says to COU is DE. This says to counterfeit is death. That's pretty serious wording there on the back. One of the other things they did to prevent counterfeiting was use the images of actual leaves. They would press leaves and ink them, and that way it would be very difficult to counterfeit that. It was easy to do letters, but it was hard to do images. But the coolest part of this is right here. You can kind of see the P, the R, and if you go a little bit further, I know this is a mess, but you can see ANKLI. This was printed by Benjamin Franklin. Yes, this note, this particular piece of paper was handled by Benjamin Franklin himself. He had printed these notes. He had come up with the design for the anti-counterfeiting measures. Just to hold this note is an amazing piece of history for me. One of my favorite notes in my collection. It's one thing just to have an old note. It's another thing to have a note that's got this kind of a connection to our past. And that's why it's number 2 on my list. So what's number 1? Notes with cool stories. Well, here we go. I have my $10,000 gold certificate. This is a 1900 $10,000 gold certificate. Back in 1900, we had $20 gold coins. A $20 gold coin was essentially an ounce of gold. This piece of paper represented $10,000 or 500 ounces of gold. Now, if you want to move 500 ounces of gold, have fun. That's heavy, okay? 500 ounces of gold is going to weigh a lot. It's not like you can put 500 of those coins in your pocket. Yeah, so what they did was they just simply issued the the gold certificate, this one here, for $10,000. Side note, 500 gold coins today at about $2,000 per ounce. It's $1 million worth of coins, so this note represents roughly $1 million today. Anyway, in 1933, the federal government said you cannot own gold anymore, and they recalled all gold certificates, all the gold coins, made you cash it out for Federal Reserve notes, and the like. And every single one of these certificates was also redeemed. Now, these were a piece of history. They were stamped, and they were holed. You can see it says, the Treasurer of the U.S. or Federal Reserve Bank. That's who redeemed this particular note. But they were all stored at the post office in Washington, D.C. Now, in 1935, that post office caught on fire. And someone at the post office was aware that these notes were being stored there, so they ran upstairs and they busted out a window and started throwing these notes out the window to save them. So during this fire, you now had $10,000 bills floating down onto the street and landing in puddles and catching fire and whatnot. You can see this particular note has burn damage on it. It does have water damage as well, because the only way you can own one of these notes is if it was one of the notes that came out of that window through the fire. How is that for a cool story? The only reason this exists is because someone threw it out a window of a burning building. Roughly 400 of these notes made it out through that window, and this is one of them. So that is definitely the coolest story that I have about any of my notes. So that's what I've got, my top 10/20/5 notes with really cool stories. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys learned a lot through all these different notes. If you learned anything new, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. Love reading your comments. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.